The morning mist rolled across the Montana Valley like a ghost reluctant to leave, clinging to the weathered fence posts that marked the boundaries of Sophia's ranch. At 34, she had inherited the 200-acre property from her late father 3 years ago, and the loneliness of managing it alone had become her constant companion. The October air bit through her flannel shirt as she hauled feed buckets toward the barn, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp mountain air. That's when she saw him again, the young colt, perhaps 8 months old, standing just beyond the property line, where the wild grassland met her cultivated pastures. His coat was a dusty brown, matted with burrs and dried mud, and his dark eyes held an intensity that made Sophia pause. This was the 4th morning in a row he'd appeared, always maintaining the same careful distance, always watching her with that peculiar mixture of fear and determination. "Hey there, little guy," Sophia called softly, setting down the buckets. The colt's ears pricked forward, but he didn't flee like the other wild horses that occasionally passed through. Instead, he took a tentative step closer, then another, before stopping about 30 feet away. His small body trembled, whether from cold or anxiety, Sophia couldn't tell. She'd mentioned the colt to Mason, her part-time ranch hand, the previous day. The 60-year-old man had worked these lands longer than anyone and knew the wild herds better than most. "Probably got separated from his mama," Mason had said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Sometimes the young ones get confused, start following humans, thinking we might help them find their way back." But something about this colt seemed different. He wasn't just lost. He was purposeful, deliberate in his appearances. Each morning he arrived at the same time, always when Sophia was doing her morning rounds, and unlike a truly wild horse, he didn't panic when she moved. He simply maintained his distance, watching, waiting. Sophia grabbed a handful of oats from her pocket and extended her hand. "Come on, sweetheart, I won't hurt you." The colt's nostrils flared, catching the scent, but he backed away, shaking his head frantically. Then, to Sophia's surprise, he turned and trotted a few steps toward the forest line before stopping and looking back at her, as if asking her to follow. "You want me to come with you?" she asked, feeling slightly foolish talking to a wild animal. The colt repeated the behavior, a few steps toward the woods, then a pause to look back. Sophia glanced at her watch. She had a dozen chores waiting, and Hunter Morrison was supposed to stop by later to discuss buying some of her hay. But something in the colt's eyes, a desperation she recognized from her own reflection, made her hesitate. That afternoon, Hunter arrived as scheduled, his diesel truck rumbling up the gravel drive. His 12-year-old daughter, Chloe, jumped out first, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she ran toward the barn. "Miss Sophia, Dad says you've got a wild colt hanging around." Hunter followed more slowly, his weathered face creased with concern. At 45, he managed one of the largest cattle operations in the county, and his practical approach to ranching often clashed with Sophia's more sentimental nature. "Chloe's been going on about it all morning," he said, removing his hat. "You know wild horses can bring disease to your stock, right?" Sophia nodded, leaning against the fence rail. "He's not coming close enough for that to be a worry. Besides, something's off about him, Hunter. He's not acting like a normal wild colt." "How so?" Hunter asked, though his tone suggested he was humoring her more than genuinely interested. Before Sophia could answer, the colt appeared again at the edge of the meadow. Chloe gasped, grabbing her father's arm. "There he is! Oh, Dad, he's beautiful!" The colt stood perfectly still, his attention fixed on Sophia. Then, as he'd done that morning, he began his strange dance, walking toward the forest, stopping, looking back, clearly trying to communicate something. "That is odd," Hunter admitted, his skepticism wavering, "almost like he wants you to follow him." "That's what I thought," Sophia said. She made a quick decision. "Hunter, would you mind if we postponed the hay discussion? I want to see where he's trying to lead me." Hunter frowned. "Could be dangerous, Sophia. You don't know what's out there. Could be a bear kill he's leading you to, or worse." But Chloe was already pulling on her father's sleeve. "Please, Dad, can we go too? Please." Looking at his daughter's excited face, Hunter sighed. "All right, but we're taking the rifles, just in case." They saddled 3 horses quickly, Sophia on her reliable mare, Buttercup, Hunter on his stallion, Duke, and Chloe on her gentle gelding, Patches. The colt watched their preparations with visible agitation, pawing the ground and whinnying softly. When they finally mounted and rode toward him, he turned immediately and began trotting toward the forest, constantly checking to ensure they followed. The path he led them on was no random wandering. The colt moved with purpose through the towering pines, following what appeared to be a game trail that wound deeper into the wilderness. The forest grew denser, the canopy blocking out much of the afternoon sun. Sophia could hear Hunter muttering behind her about foolishness and wasted time, but Chloe's excitement was palpable. After about 20 minutes of riding, the colt suddenly broke into a run, disappearing around a cluster of large boulders. Sophia urged Buttercup forward, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. As they rounded the rocks, she pulled up short, causing Hunter to nearly collide with her. In a small clearing ahead, partially hidden by fallen logs and thick undergrowth, lay a mare. Even from a distance, Sophia could see she was in bad shape. Her bay coat was slick with sweat despite the cool air, and her breathing came in labored gasps. The colt stood beside her, nuzzling her neck, making soft, distressed sounds. "Jesus Christ," Hunter breathed, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "That's his mother." They dismounted carefully, tying their horses to nearby trees. As they approached, Sophia could see the problem. The mare's right hind leg was grotesquely swollen with what appeared to be a deep, infected wound just above the hoof. The smell of infection hung in the air, and flies buzzed around the injury despite the cool weather. "Looks like she got tangled in something," Hunter said, kneeling at a safe distance. "Maybe old barbed wire or a trap. That infection's been building for days, maybe a week." The mare tried to rise when they got close, her eyes rolling white with fear, but she couldn't put any weight on the injured leg. The colt positioned himself between them and his mother, not aggressive, but clearly protective. "We need Benjamin," Sophia said, referring to the local veterinarian, "but there's no way we can get her out of here in this condition." Chloe, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "The colt knew, didn't he? He knew his mom was dying, and he came to get help." "He came to get you, Miss Sophia." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. The intelligence, the determination, the daily visits. It all made sense now. This young animal had overcome every instinct telling him to fear humans because his mother's life depended on it. Sophia pulled out her cell phone, relieved to find she had 1 bar of signal. Benjamin answered on the 3rd ring, and she quickly explained the situation. "I can be there in an hour," he said. "But Sophia, if the infection's gone septic, there might not be much I can do." While they waited, Hunter rode back to Sophia's ranch to get supplies, blankets, water, and Sophia's emergency medical kit. Chloe stayed with Sophia, and together they tried to calm the mare, talking softly and moving slowly. The colt gradually relaxed, seeming to understand they were trying to help. At one point, he approached Sophia, and for the first time, let her touch him. His coat was rough under her fingers, and she could feel him trembling. "You're such a brave boy," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "You did so good, bringing us here." When Benjamin arrived, the sun was already beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The veterinarian, a thin man in his 50s with gentle hands and infinite patience, immediately went to work. His expression grew increasingly grim as he examined the mare. "The infection's spread too far," he said quietly. Her temperature's through the roof, and I can feel the heat in the bone. She's got maybe a day, 2 at most, even with antibiotics." Sophia refused to accept Benjamin's prognosis. "There has to be something we can do. That colt didn't work this hard to find help, just for us to give up." Benjamin sighed, rubbing his face. "I can try aggressive antibiotic treatment, but she'd need round-the-clock care. IV fluids, wound cleaning every few hours, constant monitoring, and even then—" "I'll do it," Sophia said immediately. "We'll set up a shelter right here. I'm not leaving her." Hunter looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Sophia, you can't camp out in the woods for days, nursing a wild horse that's probably going to die anyway." But looking at the colt, who was pressed against his mother's side, Sophia's resolve only strengthened. "That baby came to me for help. He trusted me when every instinct told him not to. I won't abandon them now." Over the next 2 hours, they worked to create a makeshift camp. Hunter and Mason, who'd arrived with additional supplies, strung up tarps between trees to create a shelter. Benjamin started an IV line, pumping the mare full of antibiotics and fluids. Sophia's friend Ava arrived with camping equipment, food and warm clothes, having heard about the situation through the rural community's efficient gossip network. "You're crazy. You know that?" Ava said, helping Sophia set up a small camping stove. "Most people would have called the wildlife department and been done with it." "Most people didn't have that colt look them in the eye and ask for help," Sophia replied. The first night was the hardest. The mare's fever spiked around midnight and she thrashed weakly, making horrible groaning sounds that echoed through the forest. The colt never left her side, occasionally touching his nose to hers, as if encouraging her to hold on. Sophia and Benjamin took turns monitoring her vitals and adjusting the IV drip. Around 3 a.m., during Sophia's watch, the mare's breathing became dangerously shallow. Sophia found herself praying for the first time since her father's death, not to any specific deity, but to the universe itself, asking for one small miracle for a brave little colt who'd risked everything for his mother. As dawn broke on the second day, the mare was still alive, though barely. Benjamin, who'd gone home and returned, was amazed. "Her fever's down 1/2 degree. It's not much, but it's something." They developed a routine over the following days. Sophia and Ava took 12-hour shifts, with Benjamin visiting twice daily to administer medications and clean the wound. Hunter, despite his initial skepticism, brought hot meals and fresh supplies. Chloe visited after school each day, reading to the horses from her books, convinced that the sound of her voice helped. Mason came by with an old Native American remedy his grandmother had used on horses, a poultice made from local plants. "Can't hurt," he said gruffly, clearly embarrassed by the suggestion. Benjamin, surprisingly, agreed to try it. On the 4th day, the mare turned a corner. Her fever broke completely, and she managed to eat some grain mash Sophia had prepared. The wound, while still serious, showed signs of healthy tissue growth. The colt, sensing the improvement, became more playful, actually engaging in little running spurts around the clearing before returning to check on his mother. "I'll be damned," Benjamin said, shaking his head in wonder. "In 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this. By all rights, she should have been dead 2 days ago." The recovery still took weeks. They built a more permanent shelter, and Hunter helped construct a temporary fence around the clearing to keep predators away, while still allowing the horses freedom to leave if they chose. They never did. As the mare grew stronger, she began to accept carrots and apples from Sophia's hand, though she remained wary of the others. The transformation wasn't just in the horses. Sophia found her loneliness lifting, replaced by a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since her father's death. The community had rallied around her effort, and she realized she'd been so focused on managing the ranch alone that she'd forgotten to let people in. One morning, 6 weeks after that first encounter, Sophia arrived at the clearing to find both horses gone. Her heart sank, but she also understood. They were wild creatures. This had always been temporary. She stood in the empty clearing, crying freely, grateful for what they'd taught her about trust, determination, and the power of compassion. That evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, she heard a familiar whinny. The colt and his mother stood at the edge of her property, just as the colt had that first morning. But this time, they weren't alone. A small band of wild horses grazed behind them, their family group, Sophia realized. The mare looked healthy, her coat gleaming in the dying light. The colt pranced forward, stopping at the same 30-foot distance he'd maintained in the beginning. But now there was no fear in his eyes, only recognition, and something that looked remarkably like gratitude. He reared up playfully, spun in a circle, then galloped back to his mother. Hunter and Chloe, who'd come for dinner, joined Sophia on the porch. "They'll be back," Chloe said confidently. "He knows this is a safe place now." She was right. The wild horses became regular visitors to the edges of Sophia's land, never quite tame, but no longer truly wild either. The colt, whom Chloe had named Brave, would sometimes come close enough to take apples from Sophia's hand, his rough tongue tickling her palm. The local newspaper picked up the story, and soon people from neighboring counties came to see the wild horses that had bridged the gap between two worlds. But for Sophia, the real miracle wasn't the mare's recovery, or even the unusual trust the colt had shown. It was the reminder that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected places, and that answering a call for help, no matter how strange or inconvenient, can transform not just the life of the one asking, but the life of the one who chooses to respond. Standing there in the gathering darkness, watching the wild horses move like shadows across her land, Sophia understood that loneliness wasn't cured by simply having people around. It was cured by opening your heart to connection, even when that connection came in the form of a desperate young colt who had somehow known that among all the humans he could have approached, she was the one who would understand that love sometimes means camping in the woods for a week, fighting for a life everyone else has given up on. The colt's determination had saved his mother, but in a way, Sophia was only beginning to understand. It had saved her too. The ranch no longer felt empty. It felt like home, a place where the wild and the tame could coexist, where trust could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, and where a small act of faith from a brave little colt could ripple out to touch an entire community. As the horses disappeared into the darkness, Sophia whispered a thank you to the universe for sending her exactly what she hadn't known she needed. A reminder that sometimes the greatest strength comes from admitting we can't do everything alone, and that help can arrive in the most unexpected forms, if only we're brave enough to follow where it leads.